William Morris, Chapter 9 Agents. As a kid, you don't know what adults are really like until you start working with them. Before you enter the working world, there's always some veneer of propriety separating you from the true nature of grown up life. But once you're together, toiling under the same roof, toiling for the man, adults are no longer your parents or teachers. They're your colleagues, and the masks come off. I had no idea this was the case until I started working at William Morris and discovered that most adults are just aging children with money. There was an agent whose farts were so profuse and malignant, his assistant kept a giant aerosol can on her desk, dramatically fumigating the space between them and flapping her hand in front of her nose every time he let one rip. There was a squat guy who strode around the office in purple suits and saddle shoes, unironically, brandishing a golf club and dictating incredible, powerful memos at the top of his lungs. Agents back then didn't just use their assistants to pick up their dry cleaning, they used them to procure drugs, organize dates, and store their stool samples. I'm not even kidding. My boss wasn't like that. He was a family man, a straight shooter, a decent human. It was a blessing to work for him, but also, perhaps, my ultimate downfall. One of the wonders of the William Morris economic miracle was there was always an entry level job available at WMA. At least one agent was always too crazy to hold on to an assistant for more than a week, or some assistant was always realizing that no opportunity was worth the persistent degradation of assistanthood. There was an agent who ran through assistants like PPP at a COVID testing center because he made them sleep on a cot in his office. It's not like he was working for NORAD. He was just trying to fill open writing assignments. I thought that guy must be the hardest working agent in the building. Later, I realized he was probably just the most ineffective. One time, I got stuck working late on a Friday night at William Morris with Mike Simpson's assistant, Judd Landon, who, by the way, did the finest Joan Hyler imitation in the building. We had been working on the submission package for From Dusk Till Dawn, an abandoned Tarantino script that Johnny Nunari resuscitated after Pulp Fiction redefined the economics of independent film. The idea was to send every single buyer in Hollywood, be it at their home, their office, or their ski chalet, the script and the deal terms before close of business Friday. They would all have the weekend to read and evaluate the project and then offer a counter by Monday morning. The ask was insane, and Mike Simpson told us that if anyone accepted it, we hadn't asked for enough. But when crunch time came late Friday afternoon, one of mine and Judd's printers fritzed out, and we found ourselves composing letters on one computer and then running frantically halfway around the building to shove letter quality paper into a printer on the other side to churn out proper cover letters to attach to the scripts. Once we finally got the last packet out, we were exhausted, and Judd and I decided to treat ourselves to a ride down in the elevator to the lobby. But when we got aboard, there was already another assistant inside. She was standing in the corner, choking back tears. Her boss was a real ball breaker, a former attorney, a New York brawler with a thick accent and a weakness for F-bombs. I've been on calls where she just reamed down her assistant in a deluge of expletives, over nothing, without a care for who heard. Judd and I shared a look before he asked her if she was okay. Judd was pretty senior as far as assistants went, so I just kind of followed his lead. She nodded, snorting up her tears. My boss is just so smart. She started bawling, ugly, wrenching sobs. It kind of broke my heart. Her boss wasn't very smart. It was just easy to gaslight when you possessed all the power. We got to the bottom floor, and the assistant shuffled out ahead of us. I think this job is giving me cancer, she mumbled, and Judd and I snorted out some gallows laughter. It was funny in a way, and we were giddy from finishing our job. I'm serious, she said, and stumbled down to her office to finish her work. I believed her too. Toxic fear drove much of the action and inaction at WMA. I remember once stumbling upon David Lubliner at the copy machine in the lit pit. This was the cluster of assistant desks all shoved together on the second floor, where the agents represented writers and directors, motion picture lit as opposed to actors and actresses, motion picture talent. David was making actual carbon copies of his boss's correspondence and stapling them to a hard copy of the email he'd already sent, distributing them to their appropriate recipients. I was astonished. I had never forwarded a CC in my life. Sure, I typed up the letter and put the names of the appropriate agents below my boss's signature, but then I just pretended I had sent them to the designated agent. I would never do it in actual fact because I was pretty sure if those agents received my copies, I would be fired. I didn't know what I was doing, and I was certain I was doing something wrong. And if I was not doing something wrong, my boss probably was. I was not going to be the one who created the paper trail that led to our demise. What are you doing? I asked David. This is what real assistants do, Nick. It's called CYA. Cover your ass. The rest of us don't work in Rick Hess land. Jeez, I hadn't realized how lucky I was. I really should have because I had some crazy interactions with the agents I did not work for. One time, after the second floor men's room, the bathroom nearest to Arnold Rifkin's office, had undergone a much needed facelift, the head of the motion picture department came in there to find me taking a leak at the urinal. He didn't know me. We had never met. For all he knew, I could be a client of the agency, though I suspect we assistants exuded a certain energy, maybe even an odor that senior agents could detect in the wild. He was midway through a noisy leak when he suddenly exploded in frustration. Jesus Christ, he said. It smells like somebody shit a lobster in here. His assessment was disturbingly accurate. Despite every effort on my part to evade his gaze, he somehow caught my eye and turned the full fury of his attention on me. Hey, you! He wagged his finger in my general direction. Send an email to Jeff Robin. He didn't wait for my assent before he started dictating. The stench in the second floor men's room is unacceptable and must be addressed immediately. Signed, John Burnham. I was now at the sink, washing my hands, and could see his reflection in the glass as he continued gesticulating, his hips undulating before the urinal. Oh, he exclaimed, a thought suddenly dancing into his brain. While you're at it, send an email to Mike Simpson. We need to talk about the back-end deal we proposed for Gus. He paused, maybe weighing his next memo, then exclaimed, apropos of nothing, Okay, great. I dried my hands and headed for the door of the toilet. He was still peeing. And copy my office, he hollered as I exited the toilet. Now these copies I did send off. On some level, I hoped he would know who I was. I hoped he would be impressed. I don't think he was, because the only other interaction I ever had with him before leaving WMA was over a travel request form I had failed to fill out when my boss flew down to Miami Beach to go deep sea fishing with Andy Garcia. I had been experiencing the relative peace you enjoy when your boss is out of town and you've carved out a chunk of time to make headway on some of the bigger systemic issues plaguing your office: the outdated script log, the Lassie file. In my case, this meant doing precisely nothing. Into this idyll of friendly chit chat and hangover recovery, I saw my phone light up with a call. It was the head of the motion picture department, John Burnham, calling. I don't think I had any friends working in his office at this point, so my senses immediately went on high alert. I answered the phone. I have John Burnham calling for you. Oh, I said, Rick's out at the office. No, the assistant assured me with a voice that stilled me, like a pin piercing a butterfly's wing. He's calling for you. Despite my many problems and flaws, I have a pretty high regard for myself. I have failed a lot, but it never stops me from assuming that at any second my ship will come in. John Burnham must be calling me with some very special assignment. Who is this? The voice said when he came on the line, accusatory and annoyed. It's Nick Morton, Rick Hess's assistant, I answered. Right, he said. And am I to understand that Rick Hess flew to Miami without filling out a travel request form? I paused. This was clearly not the call where I get plucked, Great Expectations style, from the obscurity of assistantdom to the office of special envoy to the A-list. Still, I had no idea what he was getting at. His assistant hollered some name from her desk, an incoming call. Call back, he snapped, laser focused on my response to his question. I'm not sure, I answered. You're not sure, he repeated, his tone damning. Well, if you didn't fill out the travel request form, who might have? I could hear the assistant holler another name. Call back, he interjected more angrily, as though he could not understand why it was not eminently clear that reaming out Nick Morton was the most pressing business of the day. Sorry, I said. I guess I didn't fill out a travel request form. Why not? He asked, and suddenly he was Gene Hackman piloting a nuclear sub, sizing me up to see if I had the right stuff. You could hear the phone in his office ringing off the hook. It was a very busy office, 500 calls a day. The assistant was only interrupting him for the ones that she thought were too important to ignore. The others were going to voicemail, or she was handling them herself. I couldn't imagine what could be less important than interrogating a no-name assistant in the independent film division over a clerical error. Still, what did I know? Really, he said, the word rolling luxuriously off his tongue. And how long have you been working here? You could almost see the gleam in his eye, like he was fucking Hercule Poirot on the verge of fingering the perp. But before I could answer and affirm his thesis, the assistant hollered yet one more name, and you could hear the desperation in her voice, and he finally conceded. Fuck, he exclaimed. I have to take this. He hung up on me. I was rattled. I was in the sights of the head of the motion picture department, and he was pissed. And yet, whatever mistake I had made, it was an innocent mistake. I really hadn't known about travel request form. I'm sure there was some language about it in my employee handbook, but I had never bothered to read that. Did anyone? Anyway, as the silence persisted, I began to believe that the crisis had passed, that one of the billion five-alarm fires that was always consuming William Morris had surely distracted this guy long enough that he would forget my minor infraction. But that didn't happen. The phone rang again. It was him. I have John, the assistant started. She didn't even finish the sentence before he broke onto the line. He was furious now. How long have you worked at this agency? Suddenly we were right smack dab in the climactic scene of A Few Good Men. But who was Tom Cruise and who was Jack Nicholson? 11 months, I stammered. And you expect me to believe that in 11 months you were never shown how to fill out a travel request form? The assistant hollered another name. Tell him to hold. This was a good thing for me. If he was keeping someone on hold, the clock was ticking, and I just had to survive this crucible until time ran out. I'm sorry, I said. I just didn't know about travel request forms. He wasn't buying it. In 11 months. 11. You never had to fill out a single travel request form? No, I protested. I never did. There was a long, silent pause on the other end of the line. He was a lion stalking a mouse, debating whether my meager portion of protein was worth the effort. I wanted to tell him the king was the king. No mouse was going to change that. But I held my breath, awaiting my fate. The phones continued popping off, a casino of alarms in the background as his assistant bellowed names at his wall of indifference. Well, he finally growled. Fill it out now and get it on my desk before 5 p.m. He hung up the phone. I guess I had crawled into a crevice that was too annoying and too impenetrable for his lethal paw to reach. The juice ain't worth the squeeze, as Sean Ferris would say to me years later in some doomed pitch. I lived to see another day. The truth is that by my 11th month at William Morris, I had become a pretty good assistant. I knew the difference between a married and unmarried print. We're talking celluloid here, and could book the Adikoff screening room at the drop of a hat. I could calculate the return on a gross corridor crafted by the maestro himself, Mike Simpson. My boss and I could now laugh about that time I'd read a John Hertzfeld 3 Days in the Valley script, decided it was no good, and called John, a client, myself, to tell him I was sorry, but we here at William Morris couldn't help him. Oops. That one had senior management in my boss's office 5 minutes after I hung up the phone. I had not only survived almost an entire year, but I had thrived. For the last project the independent film division took out to the market and sold, I and Hans Schiff, the other assistant in the division, wrote the deal memo ourselves. I had come to feel I was a valued member of an elite special unit deployed to execute some of William Morris's most critical ops. I kind of loved it. But none of that really mattered because there was no place for me at William Morris. I wasn't on the agent track. I hadn't started in the mailroom where agent trainees were required to begin their careers. I had made a 1 year commitment, and it was coming to an end. Also, I was pretty sure I didn't want to be an agent. I loved the pace and the camaraderie and the gossip, but it felt to me that agents were always mired in an ugly conflict of interest. What was best for the client wasn't always best for the agent. What was best for the agent wasn't always best for the agency. No one ever seemed to think at all about what was best for the film. I wanted to serve a higher calling. I wanted to make great movies. But in truth, the most important factor in my decision to move on from William Morris relied on the fact that I worked for an ascendant agent in a white hot department who had a reputation for being a decent guy. It was a job that assistants on the agent track, assistants with more juice than me, wanted for themselves. So when Mike Simpson's assistant, Judd Landon, set his sights on my chair, I had no choice but to move on. I was okay with it. I had a skill I could market. I was a good assistant. I'd find another job, and I believed that no matter what happened to me, I could always fall back on my administrative skills to find work. I still believe it now, though I'm probably too old and ugly at this point to be someone's front man. While I did not have a next job lined up, I had a plan. I would sit on the sidelines until a job came along where I'd be working for someone powerful enough to promote me. I wasn't going to work for some VP in some development department. I was going to work for a chairman, a CEO, and I would work so hard for them that they would have no choice but to make me an exec. My only remaining task left at William Morris was to train my replacement. At least, that's what I thought.